Okay, here's another, said Mr. Benedict. Remember this one? It shows a picture of a chessboard with only a black pawn out of its original position, and it reads, according to the rules of chess, is this position possible? Constance writes in response, rules and schools are tools for fools. I don't give two mules for rules. Whoa. Again, Mr. Benedict laughed, his dolphin laughed. This time, he couldn't stop, but laughed longer and louder until tears entered his eyes. And then, without warning, his eyes closed, his chin dropped to his chest, and he fell asleep. Rhonda leapt forward to catch his glasses, which had slipped from his nose. Fortunately, Mr. Benedict had been leaning against the desk when he fell asleep. He only slumped forward a bit and didn't fall to the floor. Even so, Rhonda took him carefully about his waist and said, "Quick, one of you, bring me a chair." Kate jumped to her feet and slid her chair over. Rhonda lowered Mr. Benedict onto it and eased his head into a comfortable position. His breathing deepened into a gentle snore as if he'd been asleep for hours. Recovering from his surprise, Renee realized why Rhonda and number 2 stuck so close to Mr. Benedict when he walked around. If he'd often fell asleep like this, he must risk some nasty falls. "Is he all right?" Sticky whispered. "Oh yes, he's fine," Rhonda said. "He'll be awake any moment. He seldom sleeps longer than a minute or two." And indeed, even as she spoke, Mr. Benedict's eyelids fluttered open, and he rose abruptly from the chair and said, "Ah," taking out his pocket watch. He squinted to read it, then touched the bridge of his nose as if searching for something. "I'm afraid I can't read without my glasses." "Here," said Rhonda, handing them to him. "Thank you." With his glasses on, Mr. Benedict checked the watch and gave a nod of satisfaction. "Only a few moments then. That's good. I would hate to have left you waiting long." He gave a ferocious yawn and ran his fingers sleepily through his hair, as people often do when they first wake, which likely accounted for his disheveled state. "This is another thing I need to explain to you," said Mr. Benedict. "I have a condition known as narcolepsy. Are you familiar with it?" "Sure, it's a disorder characterized by sudden and uncontrollable attacks of deep sleep," said Sticky, then ducked his head shyly. "At least, that's what the dictionary says. The dictionary is correct. Although the condition takes different forms with different people, in my case, an attack is usually triggered by a strong emotion. For this reason, I wear green plaid suits. I discovered years ago that green plaid has a soothing effect on me, and always try to remain calm. However, every now and then I must allow myself a hearty laugh. Don't you agree? What is life without laughter?" The children uneasily nodded politely. "Now then, where did I leave off? Oh yes, Constance. I take it you didn't find her answers amusing as I do." "I'm not sure. However, perhaps you laughed while I was sleeping?" He glanced at them hopefully, but was met with blank faces. "I see. Well, perhaps you'll find this amusing." Instead of answering the questions on the second test, she composed a long poem about the absurdity of the test and its rules, particularly about the missing 4th step, which apparently reminded her of donut holes because these were the topic of the second poem. She is very irritated, it seems, that every donut contains a hole. She feels she is being robbed. I remember a particularly fictitious rhyme between flaky buffet and bakery theft. Let's see, where was it? I have it right here. He began flipping through the test pages. "Excuse me," Sticky said. "Sir, how is it this girl passed the test, even if she didn't answer any of the questions? I mean, she didn't even try." "There are tests," said Mr. Benedict, "and then there are tests." "I beg your pardon?" "It will all come clear presently, Sticky. Ah, here they are at last." The door was opening, and into the room now came number 2, looking vexed, followed by Milligan, looking gloomy. And with them was Constance Contraire, looking very, very small. It took a moment for the children to realize that Constance had arrived with the others. From Milligan's sad face, their eyes had to travel quite a distance downward before lighting up upon the girls. She was very little indeed, and very pudgy too, which made her almost exactly the size and shape of a fire hydrant. A resemblance strengthened by her red raincoat and rosy red cheeks. Renee's first impulse was to feel sorry for her. It must be difficult to be so much smaller than other children. But then Constance gave him a cross look, as if she positively disliked him, and Renee's sympathy diminished. Helping the girl into the chair, it wasn't a particularly large chair, but she still needed help getting up into it. Number 2 said, rather than finish the maze, Constance chose a quiet corner and sat down to have a picnic. It took Milligan some time to find her. I'm not apologizing, Constance said. Nor were you asked to, replied Mr. Benedict. I'm pleased to hear you had supper. Did you enjoy your picnic then? Have quite enough to eat? Quite, said Constance. Very well, thank you, Milligan. With a nod, the unhappy man pulled his hat down over his eyes and withdrew from the study. Number 2, meanwhile, took up her position next to Mr. Benedict, who, after introducing Constance to the other children, she gave them all such a crabby look that no one offered to shake her hand. At last, began to explain. My young friends, he said, his face growing solemn, let me cut to the chase. I wish I could tell you that having passed these tests, you are now to enter into a pleasant period of education. On the contrary, what I have to tell you is extremely unpleasant indeed. The children frowned in puzzlement. Was he joking? He certainly seemed serious. Perhaps this too was a test, a way of gauging their commitment? For years now, Mr. Benedict went on, I have conducted these tests in hopes of forming a team of children to help me on an urgent project. You may be aware that some years ago, Rhonda took the tests, as did number 2. In fact, a great many children have taken these tests, and yet I have been unable to form a team. Why is this? For one thing, very few children pass. For another, those who have passed have not done so at the same time. And this, you see, is crucial. I do not simply need a team, I need a team of children. Yet children do not remain children for long. Herein has lain the difficulty. Rhonda was a child only a few years ago, and number 2 a few years before that. But as you see, they are now quite grown up. They have stayed on with me as assistants, and indeed, their prodigious gifts have helped me tremendously. But like myself, they cannot form a part of the team. So far, Mr. Benedict had said nothing that struck Renee as particularly unpleasant. If anything, he had begun to feel even more proud of himself and of his new friends for having done something unusual. It was obvious that Mr. Benedict believed what they had took to form this special team, but already he sensed that Mr. Benedict did not speak lightly. If he promised something unpleasant, Renee was sure that something unpleasant would come. Next to him, Sticky was squirming uncomfortably, apparently thinking the same thing, and Kate had just glanced in Renee's direction, seen the uncertainty in his eye, and nodded her silent agreement. The bad news was coming. All right, we'll stop right there. The bad news was coming.